Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks especially to our guests today, Kate Warne. Kate, I want to make sure I get her title correct, is the Director of Editing, Design, and Production at the University of California Press. I'm very, very grateful to Kate for joining us today. She's going to have some preliminary slides to show you. And we're going to talk about editing, publishing, and various careers. As I told Kate, we have a lot of students in from our student journal and others, obviously, who are interested in the fields of editing and publishing. So without further ado, thank you, Kate. Please join me in giving a virtual and a live welcome. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here at the end of a school day. I appreciate that you're willing to come and listen to me talk. Like most people, I really like to hear myself talk, so it is not a hardship for me to be here, but I look forward to telling you a little something about my experience in publishing and then answering whatever questions you have. So I wasn't entirely sure whom I'd be speaking to, and I have just a handful of slides that I think it'll take me maybe 10 or 15 minutes to step through, and then I'm open to any and all questions. So I'll just proceed, and then we can see where we are, but please feel free to make a note of anything you want to ask me or to clarify or expand on, or anything even completely different. I'm happy to make up answers to anything I actually don't know the answer to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second while I pull up my Zoom here, my PowerPoint. Here we go. Can you all see that? Okay, great. All right, and let me come back in here and just play this. All right, so you know why we're here. As you've already heard, this is my name and this is my title. I'm the Director of Editing, Design, and Production at the University of California Press, and I have worked at UC Press. It will be 23 years this September, so I am not a person who has spent a lot of time in other organizations, and this has been my professional home for most of my life. So a very quick about me, just so that you can have a little bit of an understanding about where I came from. That first bullet is essentially my career path in a nutshell. I'm currently the Director of EDP. My previous job was also at UC Press, was managing editor, and I'll say a bit more about these roles in a moment. Before that, I was a production editor, which is a role I also had at Stanford University Press before I moved to UC. And earlier on at the University of New Mexico Press, I was, as a grad student, actually, I wrote assistant editor here, but actually I was an editorial assistant back then, which is a key entry point for publishing. I have a liberal arts degree, like most of you. I have a BA in Western Lit History and Philosophy, and then I have not one, but two unlucrative graduate degrees. I have an MA in English Lit, which I did at the University of New Mexico, and an MFA in poetry that I did at San Francisco State. That fourth bullet there is one of the ways I like to encapsulate kind of one of the biggest moments or long moments in my own career path, which is I came into publishing thinking of myself as a book person or a word person, certainly, and along the way discovered that the part of me that is a people person really ended up animating the second half of my career. So once I became a manager and then a press leader, I engaged with my work world in a whole different way, and that was something I hadn't expected until it happened. And that final bullet point is the what would you be doing if you weren't in publishing question. I probably would be in psychology somehow. I was interested in becoming a therapist for a while, doing an MFT, and I also was interested in and researched for a while organizational psych. That is another path I might very well have taken and been happy in. So publishing as a career, these are just kind of a smattering of top-level ideas about that subject. As many of you will know, and I'm sorry if I am telling you things you already know, but I wanted to just cover some of the basics. In the United States, there are what are known as the Big Five trade publishers, and those are the mega kind of conglomerate publishing companies: Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Harper One, and another one I'm not remembering. I am a member of the university press community, and there are about 150 university presses that are members of AUP, which is the Association of University Presses, mostly American presses, but that also includes university presses from some other countries. There are a bazillion other small publishers, small and mid-sized publishers, ranging from, a handful of people working out of a dining room producing small, beautiful books of poetry, up to the big companies that handle textbook publishing, which, as you will know better than I, is increasingly less book-driven in the sense of a printed bound volume. That first sub-bullet there, university presses as academy adjacent, I think for those of you who see yourselves as academics or potential academics, that may be why you're interested in this particular path. And when I think of my colleagues within the university press world, there are many, many, many of us who are there because university press publishing feels very close to being a part of the academy. And there is that's a true thing. So I think there's a lot of satisfaction and interest from working in scholarly publishing, particularly. As you all will know, also self-publishing is on the rise, and there is plenty of opportunity to do publishing work within that sphere as well, especially if you're interested in freelancing. As for what you can do at a publisher, I will in a moment talk about the various types of editing, which might be the notion that's at the top of your list. So I'll talk about that in a second. There are various types of editors, but there's also all these other roles that are important at any publishing house, and these can also be great ways to participate in a publishing environment. Marketing and publicity is a big one, and I'll say more about this perhaps later as well. It can be a really great space to work in, tends to pay a little better than some of the editing roles. And it also has a flexibility that editing has less of. If you are a marketing expert, you can move to various other industries with much more ease. There is, of course, tech, IT, and systems work. As publishing becomes increasingly digital, we need to understand and use technology more successfully. Of course, there's finance and operations. Outside the organization, there are literary agencies, which is, I don't know so much about that world, but I can say a little about it. But that's a big group of people and a way to be involved with books and authors that isn't necessarily working for a publisher. And there's an enormous freelancing world associated with publishing. Challenges that you should be aware of. You probably will have heard that within American publishing, a lack of diversity is a known problem. And I'm not going to lie, it does not feel great to be part of a community that is very heavily white. And there is a lot of attention being paid these days to the need to diversify and efforts to diversify in all the ways, not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but there are many organizations that are limited that way, and that's probably a good thing to know. Also, especially at the entry-level, pay scales in publishing tend to be low. You will probably have heard stories about entry-level jobs in New York, which is where much of America's publishing lives, are really too low to be livable in an economy like that. So that's definitely something I would say to have in mind as you consider this path. You can make a decent living in publishing. I've been lucky to do so. So it's certainly possible, but I think that's a thing to keep in mind. All right, the promised slide on the variety of editors. You may know some or all of these roles. At UC Press, we refer to sponsoring editors or sponsors, and these are acquisitions editors who bring to the press the manuscripts that we publish. A developmental editor is usually a freelancer, although some of our sponsors do developmental work. And a developmental editor works with a manuscript on the level of big picture thinking, organization, ideas, structure, not generally on the word level, sentence level, footnote level. The managing editor, at least at most scholarly presses, is the role that is the hinge point between acquisitions and production is the realm I live in. The managing editor usually has responsibility for making all the books get edited, typeset, produced on time. And the managing editor supervises at UC Press 7 production editors or PEs. And I've done both of those roles, so I can talk to those at least as they exist at UC Press. And the production editor is the person who oversees a subset of the overall list, watching manuscripts through the process from copy editing, through design, typesetting, proofreading, indexing, and out the other end as a print book or an ebook. So project management, huge part of that job. Copy editors in many places are freelancers, and they are at UC Press. Everyone in the editing department working with the managing editor has copy editing skills, but the people who actually edit our books are all freelancers. And editorial assistant is the generally recognized way into an editorial role at not only a university press, but also a trade press. And there are other kind of levels within editorial departments. You might have associate editor, editor, senior editor, executive editor, things like that. But these are the general categories that are tied to the type of work that each role does. So I had just a few items here. You may, Jeremy, you mentioned you might want to pose a couple of questions that are within this category. I'd be happy to talk more about these, but figured I'd put a few of these thoughts out here. It is competitive to get into publishing, certainly as an entry level or early career person. That first bullet, it is in fact who you know. I say that a little tongue in cheek, but connections make all the difference. And so networking, making contact whenever you can, in whatever ways you can, is likely to serve you. If you are applying for an entry-level job without many other publishing-related items on your resume, I would say if the application calls for a cover letter, spend some time on the cover letter. I'm a big fan of those myself as a hiring person. And then the other one is obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do it, which is do your research about the organization you're applying to and have some knowledge about why you would want to work for that organization and what that organization does specifically. From my perspective as a hiring manager, again, on the production side, when I'm reviewing resumes or cover letters, anything that signals to me that the applicant is really serious about publishing matters. And by that, I mean anything in one of these categories that shows more than a passing interest in this work. So any kind of internship experience or work study experience. In my world, where copy editing is part of the role, then having taken classes in copy editing would matter to me, because the demands of scholarly publishing require a certain level of expertise having to do especially with documentation and so on. So when I'm looking, although I notice if somebody says, oh, for instance, I'm the person that all my colleagues ask to proofread our papers because I'm good at catching typos, that matters, but that doesn't tell me that that person can necessarily be a copy editor. So something that gets a little more into the weeds is, I think, useful if you're serious about that particular type of work. And I can say more about this later also, but I'm a huge fan of informational interviews. I would imagine this has come up in many of these presentations, but I think asking for and doing informational interviews with as many people as you can in as many roles as you can find them is an incredibly helpful way to learn about not only what work is out there in the world, but how people came to do the work they do, what they like about it, what the job really is like, and how you can move ahead toward one of those positions. There are professional organizations in publishing. In the Bay Area, we have an organization called the Publishing Professionals Network. I participate in a group called Bay Area Women in Publishing. There are plenty of affinity groups within publishing, BIPOC in publishing, Latinx in publishing, young early career folk in publishing. There's all kinds of listservs, groups, ways to make connections with people who are in that world, and it's, I think, worth tracking those down if you're interested again in making connections. This penultimate bullet here, I would say, now that we live in this time of hybrid and remote work, this might be less true than it was, but in publishing, and certainly in academic publishing, you probably would want to be prepared to move geographic locations in order to grow your career. Many presses do not have a career path that you can just step up through the different levels to a higher editorial role. And in order to advance your career, you probably would need to go to another press. Lots of people do that. And it has historically meant moving to the location of that other press, but these days that isn't necessarily true. There are more and more remote positions. However, plug from me for working in-house if you can work in-house, at least in a hybrid capacity, because I think it's super valuable. And then lastly, on this slide, consider publishing adjacent work. If you're interested in writing, if you're interested in presenting, there are plenty of jobs that involve those skills. You might work for other departments at a university, you might work in communications, you might work in marketing, you might work in technology that serves publishing, all kinds of things. So I would say think broadly about what it is that calls you to publishing, and consider where else you might be able to scratch those itches. Here is a final slide that is a page of unsolicited advice. I am full of unsolicited advice. I'm hoping you'll actually solicit some so that I don't have to just keep spilling it the rest of the hour we have together. But these are things I invite you to consider. So I would say that first one, get a little woo-woo and can ask yourself what your values are, what are your passions, and how do you need to indulge them? Do you need your passions to be your work is a key question, which is really what that second bullet gets at. Get practical. How much does security matter to you? How much does making money matter to you? How much does working in a particular geographical location matter to you? If those things are very important, then you'll need to compromise somewhere else. I realize that's a very obvious point, but it's not one that I understood early in my career. And I wish I had thought a bit more about both those questions in my 20s, basically. You have the option of and even maybe the likelihood of a split or sequential career life. I know several people who are part-time therapists, part-time editors, and have made a very successful split career life for themselves that way, indulging different parts of their brains and their sets of interests. My partner was a history major. He was a lawyer for the first part of his life, and then he made a radical turn into emergency medicine, and now he works for the fire department as a chief on the medical side. So his path has been not what he might have guessed while he was in college. So I would say consider and be open to those radical changes of direction, because they can be delightful and satisfying. This again leads me to the next point. Prepare to be surprised by what you like or what you're good at professionally. It may not be what you think you want. It may not be what you think you're good at. Most jobs, in my experience, are not as you think they're going to be when you go in. So I think practicing a little detachment from your idea of what a job will be would be useful. And then finally, I would just say dabble. While you're in school, you have the opportunity to do that, I think, more easily than when you're not in school, but that is completely possible even after you're in school. And by dabble, I mean, again, informational interviews, but like take a class, do an internship, move toward anything that calls you. I would say that speaks to you and something that feels intrinsic to you, and just try it. You would be surprised how quickly you'll learn that something is or is not for you. By taking a single class, you might learn that editing, copy editing is absolutely not where you want to live, or any other class you can think of, a design class or a music class or a class in a particular subject. So I would say just try all the things, because you'll get a lot of good information from that. And that can really help when you look for new work or begin looking for different jobs. I think I'm going to just rest there. I'm going to stop sharing and then just come back. I'm going to take a breath and a drink of water, and I'm going to invite comments or questions from you.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was terrific. And indeed, you did hit on some of the things that have come up over the last 8 or so events. And so I hope everybody's getting those key concepts that Kate presented, including things like fit and knowing the place that you're applying to, that idea of researching the place you're applying to. I think that and then I really love the unsolicited advice. And I might want to go back over those and just highlight a few of them, because they're really terrific. And I'm also kind of vamping here for a minute while everybody gets their questions together, if anybody has any. I heard some audible affirmation here in the classroom when you mentioned the split or sequential career paths, because indeed I think some of our students have experienced that. Some of our students are coming back for their masters or for their bachelors after having had a career in another field. And so I think you're preaching to the choir here in terms of people sharing that experience, but also I think indeed it's nice to hear it from you and to hear your perspective on it. I had a question while if I can pull rank for a second, but that was about that informational interview thing that wasn't necessarily familiar to me. Is that something to sort of cold calling or cold emailing professionals within the field that you're interested in and asking them for a coffee or a chat or a phone call or something like that? Is that what you meant?
Precisely. Yeah. And I think it, of course, always helps if you have an introduction to that person, either via another person, such as me. I could introduce really any of you to somebody, probably in publishing, who might be willing to talk with you. But basically, how I've experienced an informational interview on both sides is reaching out, asking for, I would say, I hope you don't mind if I get a little specific and name the features of an informational interview I really care about. If I'm being asked to give an informational interview, I really care about someone being very clear about what they're looking for. So X amount of time, could I ask you to get on a call for 30 minutes? I'd love to ask you about your career path and your organization. And then, of course, keeping the appointment, showing up and coming with a handful of pointed questions. If someone is asking me from an informational interview, much as I love to talk about myself, I don't want to have to do any work beyond that in that setting. But if you prompt me with questions about my professional life and my professional world, I am delighted to tell you everything I can. So I would say make the questions count, and including, very importantly, at the end, ask for other names. If what I have said is of interest to you, ask me who else I might be able to put you in touch with to also ask questions of. So typically you might ask, how did you get to where you are in your career? You know, that can be interesting because you learn about the twists and turns people have taken. And then, of course, just the basics about tell me about your job. How do you spend your time? What's a typical day? What education did you have? What do you consider the credentials? Anything really that's of interest to you. For me, as long as it's a sincere question and I feel like the person is really present for our conversation, I'm totally in for that. And yeah, I think you could definitely do it cold. If you get somebody's email off a website, for instance, a publisher's website, it's going to be hit or miss. You'll have a much higher chance if you do have a connection, but you can certainly do it that way. And I actually made much use of that method when I was considering my transition into psychology that I ended up not taking. And I ended up, in fact, deciding not to pursue an organizational psych degree as a result of an informational interview that I did. I learned a couple of things that kind of tipped me towards staying in my current career. So that was super helpful to me.
That's really great. I'm glad to learn and to learn that specific term, informational interview. Because I've obviously been very narrow for the last forever in terms of the academic path. And so there were a few years where I was sort of shuffling around and looking for what to do. But then I got on this track, and it's a sort of it's a one-way track. Although it doesn't have to be. I mean, maybe we can also leave that for another day. But the sort of academic track and the different ways that can go, we'll talk about that next week when we meet some PhD students. But I think that's a really, really useful method, and I hope you all take that to heart. I really think you should be bold. I have to encourage sometimes students to be bold and go out and make those requests for conversations. Anybody in Zoom land, please either raise your hand or put a comment into the chat. And anybody here in the room, please do jump in here. There's a lot to think about, these different levels of editing. I know Evie and others who are working right now on our history journal, and I will send you a copy of that in the goodie bag, Kate. Our latest issue of the History Department Student Journal. Have a lot of sort of learn as you go experience, but I also want to open to any questions.
Well, I have one.
Go ahead, Evie.
So you talked about internships and the possibility of doing them. I know that there is one that's available right now, but it's with W.W. Norton and Company for a history editorial internship. Would you say that's a good place to start, or start with more of an academic, scholarly institution?
I would say if it's of interest to you, I would go for it. In fact, I would be inclined to, I would cast your net wide and, go toward anything that feels like it can be of value to you. Because as soon as you have anything on your resume that is relevant to publishing, it can help you get the next thing.
So my next question is, because I don't have the editorial, I don't have the internship experience, but I do have the experience of working on our journal as both an associate editor and chief editor. That put me in a better position to gain an entry-level job, or would I need to take some sort of class to get like?
I would say yes, it definitely will help because it's relevant and it's substantial. If you're interested in acquisitions editing, the subject area knowledge is also valuable. So if you're looking to acquire, deal with the authors, acquire the books for the press or the organization, then the subject area expertise is valuable. Although scholarly publishing is a good world for generalists, and although the editors who acquire in a particular subject area generate knowledge and experience in that subject area, they don't necessarily acquire in areas where they have education. And that can be I think that's very common, and that can be another way to advance your career as well, is to look for fields that you have secondary interest in, for instance, or ways that you can flex the knowledge that you have towards something else. There was something else I was going to say in response to your question. Oh, assuming that the internship or that any job requires something written from you, like an application or a cover letter. One thing I appreciate as a hiring manager is, I don't know how to express this exactly, but I appreciate when someone connects the dots for me between their experience and between the language I have used in the job posting. So if you have that very specific skill already, then you can just say, oh, I did X for 2 years at my job, you know, blah, blah, blah. Otherwise, I would say, for instance, to the person who just posed that question, if you can enumerate how things you did while working on the journal speak directly to features of the work that the intern will be doing, that is something that I value. So if it asks for organizational skills or project management skills or communication skills, being able to say, I honed my project management skills doing X and Y on this journal, or, you know, I built my communication best practices by dealing with the authors who contribute to this journal. You know, it can feel while you're writing the letter like a little bit like overkill, but for someone who's reading many cover letters or many applications, it's a help because it's just a shortcut toward making that connection.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Evie. Thanks, Kate. That issue of fit just comes up again and again and again to demonstrate your fit for the advertised position. Gabrielle has a question. Can you tell me more about copy editing, please? What does a day look like for a copy editor? What qualifications would be needed in your opinion?
Thank you for that question, Gabrielle. Copy editing is near and dear to the hearts of people in my world. So copy editing is the type of editing that deals with the language, grammar, syntax, punctuation, documentation. It's basically about making sure that there is a certain level of standardization and what we used to casually refer to as correctness on any given manuscript. And as we have recognized over time that there isn't really any such thing as standard American English, and that it's not always helpful to be super rigid about rules, nevertheless, copy editing is about standardization and understanding rules of grammar, rules of punctuation, capitalization, how to follow a style guide. And in scholarly publishing, it's a very important role because the copy editor is charged with making sure that all the notes and bibliography make sense and match, that anything requiring a citation has one, for example, and that the format of that citation is adequate to, to what's being cited. And qualifications for that would be attention to detail, for sure, and then an understanding of the things I've already named. There are plenty of classes out there for copy editing, and there's a lot of ways to learn how to be a better copy editor. And in scholarly publishing, the documentation piece is really key. And I would say from my own experience, if you're going to pursue copy editing, I would say that's a realm to have, as I learned, some humility in. You know, if you like to write, if you're good at writing, if you like language, it's very easy to assume that you would be good at copy editing, and you might be, or I might be, but there are plenty of best practices, plenty of rules, plenty of concerns and considerations to know. So I think it's something to get some training in, for sure.
Thanks. And what are some details you appreciate about people who want to be a copy editor? This is Gabrielle.
I would say I mean, the first thing that popped into my mind was assiduousness, attention to detail. Timeliness, we don't have super long schedules, so we send a manuscript to a copy editor. The manuscript might be several hundred pages, and that person will have several weeks to edit it. The copy editor is reading every single word in the manuscript and making interventions according to the instructions that we give. So I would say patient, able to separate how you would write something from how the person who's written it has written it, so that understanding questions of voice, and then also being able to, this is a wriggly one, but I would say editorial judgment. Over time, it would be editorial judgment, which is essentially knowing when to dig deeper and when to let go. And that's something that comes mostly with experience, I think.
That's great. And that's tough. Thank you for answering my questions, Gabrielle. But that's a tough one, that experience is so valuable, and getting, of course, you got to get the experience. Thanks, Gabrielle. Gabrielle is going to be copy editing our journal this year.
Oh, awesome.
So she's
Awesome.
going to be getting that experience. Are there, you mentioned classes, are there sort of standard online classes that you would direct our students to, or are there, and I can also follow up with you about this later by email, and we can share it along with the video. But does anything jump to mind in terms of courses online, that kind of thing?
The one, I don't know about too many of them, but there are, the one I know best is the UC extension, sequence and copy editing. And I imagine there are many varieties of that. I would look for something that is maybe associated with a community college or a college. It's kind of a perfect thing to teach via something like an extension course. And I'm not sure, there are editing organizations. There's one called Editcetera, which is a Bay Area based freelance editors organization, and they do online courses that that anyone can take. And they have I would say Editcetera is pretty rigorous. They have a pretty high standard when it comes to kind of the rules. So there's a very particular type of rigor at play there.
Thanks, and I'll follow up, and I'll track down and confirm with Kate these links, and I'll share with everybody a few of these options. Excellent. I love that last slide, the unsolicited advice. Just reminding our students to write down your passions and your priorities. I really think that was excellent, because as our students are going onto the job market, I think there's a tendency to be sort of buffeted by the winds and whatever's right in front of them. But I think that's a way to really to really clarify to yourself what your passions and what your priorities are. And I think that's a really nice thing that Kate mentioned, and that I think everybody should take to heart, that idea of articulating it to yourself. What is important?
Right. If I could say just something about that, Jeremy, that I don't think that following your passion and the money will come is true. But I do think that necessarily true, I should say, but I do think that you can have a secure financial life and follow your passions, but they might not be, your work life might not be the place for it. When I did my MFA in poetry, I pursued that because I really wanted to foreground a creative practice in my life. And at the time, I was honestly kind of bored in the job that I had at the time, but I had this job that I could do without a great deal of stress that allowed me to go to school on the side. And where I got fulfilled for a while was in that program. And I think there's a lot of ways to think about how you get your needs met. And if one of your needs is financial security and one of them is to do a poetry degree, they may not go together in the obvious way, but they are possible to have simultaneously. So I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone from pursuing a job that incorporates their passion, but just to have your eyes open to all the ways that you can get those needs met. Because there's more than you think. You know, it might be through a volunteer role, it might be through teaching it on the side. It might there are lots of ways to feed yourself, and ideally, maybe you get some of that in your job, but not necessarily if there are other things that you want to make sure are true.
I think that's really wise advice, and I love that sort of coming toward the end of this series. I think that's a really important bit of advice. The one thing that of course I mentioned already that rang true, I think, and I just want to note again for everybody, is that question of fit, and being able to look at a public facing advertisement for a job and know how to connect your experience to the things that are being advertised there. And again, I think to Evie's point and to Gabrielle's question, the work that you all are doing is going to be very well suited, and it'll be a question of making yourself that candidate. And I think I asked in an email exchange with you, Kate, about sort of reverse engineering the perfect job candidate, and I think you addressed that to some extent in your presentation, and also in helping students think about how they put themselves on this path to work. But was there anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of if you're in the hiring process, things that you would look for either in an interview or a resume or a cover letter that you didn't mention already?
Let me think for a second. You know, because my world on the production editing side has historically been so much about elimination of errors, you know, and about correctness, I have always really cared that somebody obviously proofread or had someone else proofread their resume and their cover letter. Of course, we all make typos all the time, but a place I think to really try to make sure that you don't is in an application for a job. To me, it signals just a measure of care that I appreciate. And this other one, I hesitate a little bit to say, because I feel like this, I'm dating myself, and I also realize I might be out of touch with how people go about finding work today. But I always really appreciate, and I try to bring this myself. I mean, you look at me now, I'm sitting at my dining room table, I'm in a t-shirt and jeans. But if I were to be conducting an interview, I would break out my best work blouse, and I would, you know, dress up a little. So there's a certain amount of demonstrating effort and polish in a way, and that is preparedness, I would say. And then also just not, you know, not wearing a sweatshirt to a job interview kind of thing. And again, I say that with some caution, because I recognize not everybody has the resources to, you know, have an interview wardrobe. I realize that it's not that simple, but I do think that bringing a certain, Jeremy, maybe you can help me with language, but I want to say just like preparedness and like dignity, you know, to an interview process really can matter. I really appreciate that when I see that. And then honestly, like excitement, enthusiasm for the job you're applying for, you know, especially if you don't have what you consider to be the perfect lineup of, oh, I've got, you know, they're asking for these 10 things and I have those 10 things. If you don't have them, then being able to say why you want them, why you think that, why you're drawn to this role, what you believe you could bring to it. Everyone who has a history degree has certainly learned some things about critical thinking and communicating complex ideas and making connections across different subjects and across different materials, right? To be able to synthesize information and convey it in a clear way. The skills that get you through school are the skills that are going to serve you in your job. So if you can articulate what you have, what you are able to do as a result of coming through school, and translate that or map that onto the job you're applying for, I think that also can be helpful. And I'm thinking, yeah, and then back to the cover letter, if you have the opportunity, I always appreciate some little gesture in the letter that tells me a little something about who the applicant is. Something, and it could be really small, but I think you don't want to overdo it on the personal detail, but some statement about something that's of interest to you or something that makes you feel like you have a connection to the press. Honestly, the main reason that's valuable is it just makes you stand out in my mind. And it's not that you need to say the right thing so that it will be the perfect match. It's more like, oh, right, this is the person who loves sailing, or this is the person who had that line about what their uncle's poetry meant to them, or something, just something that gives me something to record in my mind as I'm reviewing.
That's so a personal detail, but obviously not too much. You want to.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
great. And to your point, I mean, about the polish and the care, in our first session, if you all remember, way back years and years ago in January, when we had a representative from our Career Center join us, excuse me, she talked about the resources that are available to you all through the Career Center. And they, I think, go to some of the points that Kate was making in terms of polish, in terms of demonstrating care. Even offering a business attire on a short-term basis. If you're like me and you don't have a fancy suit at home, then you can certainly check out what they have to offer. But then also practice interviews and that kind of thing. I think that's really important. The enthusiasm for the position and the specific enthusiasm for the specific position is important. Sometimes people get nervous, and that nervousness may come across as sort of shutting down or sounding like you don't care about the position. And so I think practicing the interview over at the Career Center or with your classmates gets you past that that insecurity or that nervousness, so that you can really demonstrate that care.
Exactly. And do you mind if I interrupt, Jeremy? I was going to say one other thing I forgot, or two other things that I don't want to miss saying. One is I also never mind, and in fact appreciate it if someone actually, if you are in an interview and you feel very nervous, I never mind if someone says, I am, this is a big day for me. I feel a little nervous. I just need to take 30 seconds to collect my thoughts. That can really help you get through it. I do this. If I'm in a situation where I realize like I'm wigging inside and I need a moment, if I just say like, I'm just going to take a couple seconds and collect my thoughts, and you can just take a breath and recenter, and there is no shame in that. And it lets everybody know that you have the self-awareness and the ability also to manage the conversation in a way that suits you or that serves you. The other thing I was going to say that is going back to careers in publishing, in my experience, there's quite a lot of opportunity for lateral moves within publishing. So if you are interested in getting an editorial job, but see a publicity job or a marketing job or some other job that's within a publisher where there's some kind of connection, I have definitely seen people move around among departments and among presses. So you can, if you see a doorway in and you're not sure it's the exact part of publishing you want to be in, I would say still consider it, because once you're in, you're going to have 20 billion more connections to consider, to take all those other steps to look for other jobs that might be closer to your heart. Or you might find out that you just love publicity and that's a part of the press that you would want to stay in. So I would say, look for, if you really want to try and get a job in publishing, then look for any job in publishing. And if it's just, even minimal interest to you, at least consider it, because it can just be a wedge into the door. And then once you're in, then you have more options to move around.
I like that. And it reminds me of the point that you said, to be prepared to be surprised about what you're good at. That was nice. I like that idea, because sometimes it's not exactly what you thought. Our image of ourselves sometimes is a little bit skewed or we find ourselves in a surprising situation where we demonstrate a new skill that we didn't know we had, or a new passion. I think that's a really cool point. And if publishing is a world that you're excited about to get in and build those connections, that's really excellent advice. I want to give a moment for any more questions. Thanks to Gabrielle and Evie for being bold enough to ask, but anybody else who has questions, please, you can raise your hand in the Zoom space or type your question. There's a lot, I think a lot of really terrific advice was packed into this hour, Kate. I really appreciate it very, very much. I'm vamping again for anybody else before we let Kate go. This is, yeah, my notebook is definitely, my page is definitely full of great ideas here. I am going to follow up with you also about a few of those different classes and edit, et cetera, and that kind of thing. So I'll just make sure that I have the right links to share with everybody in terms of good copy editing training. I actually did a little bit when I was feeling around for what to do. I found myself at a law firm publishing company. And so I was doing lots of changing one number to the other number for the annual issues. And I had to catch every single, not to date myself here too much, but I had to catch every single 2001 and turn it into a 2002. And the old fashioned way, I had the actual book, and then we had to go and slice the books. We would take them and take them apart. So I did some copy editing work there, and that was an adventure, and an adventure in assiduousness, I think, and in precision. So that's definitely that was a fun. It was a fun exercise. Doesn't sound fun, but it was. Christine,
sorry, Jeremy.
Go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and I would invite anyone in the room who has a follow-up question or wants to reach out to me to do that. If you do, it will help me if you put somewhere in the subject line the CSUSB so that I will make the connection that it's coming from this particular gathering, and it will just help me pay attention to you. So feel free to reach out if you have other questions or if I can help in any other way. And I'd be happy to do that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kate. And there's Kate's email there. A note from Christina. Yeah, I mentioned the Career Center that having those clothes, Christina, and then Cody's Closet. They have business attire for interviews. So looking the part, looking sharp. Thanks, Christina. All right. I want to move toward wrapping up there then and thank Kate for taking her Monday evening to spend with everybody. I really appreciate it very, very much to demystify the field a little bit, not just academic publishing, but also publishing more broadly. Okay. I don't hear any other questions, so I am going to let you go. Kate, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I really appreciate your attention and hanging with me for this hour and letting me talk about my world with you for a little while. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And there was a little applause here. I was told that the noise suppression technology cancels out the applause, which is crazy, because now when you have a Zoom guest, you don't know you're getting applause. But anyway, there was some nice applause. I said thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'll follow up with you also about, I'll send you some goodies from our students here and from my faculty colleagues.
That's fabulous. Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good night.